Okay, it says it's streaming live now. Yeah, we'll start in about 1 minute. We're just making sure our connections are all good. This is totally different from last week. Last week there was no one on this side, and everyone was on this side. So I was like looking over here all the time. Well, there was Tito, but he was in the back. Okay, we'll get going then now that we're live. This is our 24th week in the book of Job. You already know that God permitted Satan to destroy Job's whole life. All of his possessions, his family, and his body were destroyed. Job's three best friends came to help, but instead they got into an argument with him. They're arguing about the covenant of works and how it's applied by God to people on the earth. Now the friends say that God judges wickedness almost instantly and rewards virtue almost instantly. But Job disagrees, and he says that he's suffering even though he's not wicked. But in chapter 19, the Holy Spirit spoke through Job. Job said that the Redeemer will defend me and raise my body from the dead, and Job will see God and be accepted, and he longed for that day. So Job is cheering up because the Holy Spirit has shown him that there is an afterlife. He might have suspected it before, but God never talked about it until then. The friends, though, have become so angry and disagreeable with Job that he asks them to stop making spiteful sounds. Apparently they're hissing and groaning and coughing to interrupt him. That's how angry they are at his words. But Job is cheering up, and rather than constantly lamenting his trials, now he's beginning to teach the truth to his angry friends. And that makes them even angrier, because now he's talking back. So 2 weeks ago, though, we took 1 week off from Job. We did a topical study on the concept of anarchy based on recent political events. The Bible teaches that government is an ordinance of God, which means that it's part of the creation order. It's part of what God plans. It's like gravity. Government is like gravity. It's something that God intends to always be around. And so anarchy is against all authority. Therefore, that makes it a satanic construct to oppose the order of God. A human culture requires authority structures in order to function properly, and the reason is sin. If there wasn't sin, then probably we could get along without a government. But because there's sin, the only way to keep things under control, this is one way God keeps sin under control. Last week, we looked at Eliphaz's third response to Job, and it's the start of the third round of debates. Now, Eliphaz, he's the oldest, wisest guy, perhaps, but even he has become angry. In the first one, he wasn't angry, he was sad and tried to commiserate with Job a little bit. The second time, he's getting a little annoyed that Job isn't listening, and the third time, now he's angry. So even he has gotten upset. And Eliphaz now makes up all kinds of sins that Job must have committed to be suffering this much. Now, the worst sins he can think of are robbing the poor and harming orphans and widows. Now, that's actually pretty interesting because God does hate these things immensely. And God often speaks in the Bible about his anger if you harm the helpless people. You really get in trouble for that, more than other things. But Job is not guilty of these things. These friends are just making false accusations against an innocent man. So last week, we talked a lot about the idea of false accusations. And these are made all the time, even in modern times, and especially in modern times. For example, in our current climate, the liberal side of the media is claiming, using charts and graphs and statistics, that there is systemic wide racism throughout our whole country. And they say that because black minorities have many economic disadvantages, we must be all oppressing them. Included among the proofs are things like this. Blacks make less money. Blacks don't run big companies. Blacks don't get to take out a lot of bank loans. Blacks don't get higher education scholarships. Blacks are in prison more than other ethnic groups, and etc. So these are the sort of statistics used to prove oppression by our whole country. However, I showed you that the logical philosophical principle called Occam's razor says that you usually accept the simplest explanation for any question. It's very rare that a complicated thing causes big problems. It's usually something simple. And systemic racism is not a simple explanation because it would mean that for 170 years, every level of government in every part of the country has been trying intentionally to oppress people. And that is a difficult kind of a conspiracy to keep going and keep secret. It's more likely that there is a simpler explanation that doesn't require the whole country to be oppressing. For example, one big reason I would suspect for most of those terrible statistics about black minorities and their disadvantages can be explained by one factor, which is single-parent families. The one major problem in the black community that we've seen for the last many decades is single-parent families. In other words, the guy gets the girl pregnant, either doesn't marry her or never intended to marry her, leaves her with lots of children, and then goes off and does his own thing. That means that the woman has to take care of all of the children at home on minimum wage or welfare. And then the men often go out and get arrested for various offenses and get incarcerated. Often it's drug offenses, and that's according to the liberal media, not according to me. I'm not making any judgments. In fact, the liberal media is suggesting that we remove all drug laws so that it will stop putting black people in prison. They think that'll solve the problem. Well, maybe it will. I don't know. But at any rate, the main problem then is the singleness of the black community. You cannot get ahead. You can't get bank loans. You can't go to school and get scholarships. You can't own your own home if you're poor. And the reason you're poor is because you can't get a decent job because you're a single person working on the side. So I suspect that a simpler answer like that is more likely than the system-wide oppression. So now, though, many minorities lost their jobs because of the coronavirus crisis, and after being forced to remain at home for weeks on end or months on end, these people feel victimized by the system, and they blame our whole country for it. And one political party has awakened the anarchists, and now cheers them on. They prefer riots and destruction because they hope that all this anger in the streets will propel them into the White House so that they can get rid of the evil, all-wicked Wizard of Oz, Donald Trump. Statistics are being used to promote a lie that the whole system is racist and it must be destroyed. They ignore all contrary evidence, such as Hispanics are more wealthy than black minorities, and Asian minorities are making more even than white people. So we obviously, our white people aren't oppressing everybody. We're not oppressing Asians, apparently, or as much Hispanics. But they ignore contradictions. They say that authority itself is evil. Police are racists, statues and museums symbolize oppression, economic disparity means evil capitalism, and only communism can save us. That's the idea of the anarchists. They're lying to achieve power, and they lie just like their father, the devil. So Eliphaz, though, he gets so worked up that he seems to say, I'm going to laugh when I see Job burst into flames. You can just imagine if you had an enemy and you were staring darts at them, so to speak, and they suddenly burst into flames. If you really hated them, maybe you'd laugh. That's pretty nasty. But then Eliphaz catches himself and realizes just how nasty it sounds, and so he offers Job an out. He says, Job, if you would just repent and let God heal you, he will bring you back to your health and your wealth. But at least Eliphaz has a little heart. At least he cares about Job a little. But now, today, we're going to look at Job's reply to Eliphaz in chapters 23 and 24 of Job. This is Job's seventh response, or seventh speech in the book. But he doesn't really talk to Eliphaz in any direct way, or even to the friends. He's mainly talking to himself and or to God. So you won't ever see him directly speak to Eliphaz, or at least not more than once. And these two chapters we can divide into two sections. Job's topic in these two chapters is justice. So in chapter 23 is Job, his confidence that God will bring him personal justice and vindicate him. So chapter 23 is Job talking about justice for himself. But chapter 24 is Job talking about justice in nations and societies and groups. So in other words, the whole world of justice. So let's start with chapter 23, verses 1 through 7. Then Job answered and said, Even today my complaint is bitter. My hand is listless because of my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come to his seat. I would present my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in his great power? No, but he would take note of me. There the upright could reason with him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. So Job starts by saying how much pain he's in. He says, it's hard for me to talk because I'm in a lot of pain. But he still wishes he could present his case before God. Now, you may remember that he's asked for this many times in the book before. He's always asking for God to let him present his case. But in his earlier speeches, Job was despairing that God would listen. Job says, I would love to talk to God, but he would ignore me, or he would even kill me. Now, though, Job is saying, I want to present my case, and I know he will hear me and vindicate me. So now he has happy news. He's no longer in despair. So his mood's a lot brighter, even though he's still in pain. So let's look now at verses 8 through 12. Look, I go forward, but he is not there, and backward, but I cannot perceive him. When he works on the left hand, I cannot behold him. When he turns to the right hand, I cannot see him. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandments of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. Job starts these verses by saying he's upset that he can't find God. Where is God? He's talking about the invisibility of God, obviously, but he's also talking about his emotional feelings about God. He can't feel God or perceive him. You see, when you've got an invisible being that you're dealing with, your eyes and tongue and ears don't help you find him, but your feelings can. And he used to have a relationship with God, and he misses that. He no longer senses God's presence. But he is confident that God will return soon to test him, and then he will come forth like gold. In other words, God will purify him and prove that he never did all this evil that he's accused of. It sounds a lot like Psalm 139. If you remember Psalm 139, where David says, anywhere I go, there you are. If I go down to hell, you're there. If I go to heaven, you're there. Well, Job knows that God's there. He just can't feel him, and he wishes he could. This is also Job countering Eliphaz's argument, because Eliphaz said that Job has departed from righteousness and from God's words. And Job says, no, I haven't. In fact, I've treasured God's word more than my food. And this is one of many Bible encouragements, to encourage you to memorize the Bible. Even if you only memorized one verse a week, it would be very helpful to you in certain dark times. Now we'll go on to verses 13 through 17. But he is unique, and who can make him change? And whatever his soul desires, that he does. For he performs what is appointed for me, and many such things are with him. Therefore I am terrified at his presence. When I consider this, I am afraid of him. For God made my heart weak, and the Almighty terrifies me. But I was not cut off from the presence of darkness, and he did not hide deep darkness from my face. Now this sounds depressed, but it's not really depressed. It's more stating exactly what he feels. It doesn't mean that he's deep in despair. It means that he's telling you he is afraid of God, and he has good reason to be. He said, I'm afraid of God because he terrified me, and he didn't hide darkness from my face. You know what this is? This is a statement of fear about the sovereignty of God. And that is a big, important issue, the sovereignty of God. Job recognizes that God is in charge, and God does whatever he wishes. This terrifies Job. A lot of dinging going on over there. It's George. Yeah, we'll blame George. Job admits that the sovereignty of God scares him because he doesn't understand why God is doing this. I mean, if all of these horrible things happen to you, you wouldn't understand either. I mean, how can you understand all this badness that's gone on? It's the sovereignty of God, and he knows it. You see, Job recognizes that the sovereignty of God is a scary thing. It means what? It means that God is in control over you. You're not in control of your life. God is. That's a scary thing. His friends, they deny that God's in charge. Or, well, no, they don't deny it. They just deny the way God can do his sovereignty. His friends have God in a box, and God's not allowed to do that, and he's not allowed to do that. But God laughs at them and says, ha, you think that? Wrong. Job knows the truth, but the truth is scary, and that is what the sovereignty of God is. It is scary. The sovereignty of God is one of those key doctrines that separates Reformed theology and Calvinism from all other theologies that exist in Christianity. You see, Arminian churches teach that human free will is God. You decide, every human personally decides their fate. God has nothing to do with your fate. You pick it yourself. And they're wrong. That's the difference between the sovereign Calvinism system and the free will Arminian system. If humans decide for themselves who gets saved and who doesn't, then humans plan history. Because history could all change if one person decided to do something differently. So the human heart is stubborn, and we want to think that we're in control. We want to think that we can do whatever we wish. Now that's half correct. What half of that is correct? You are free to do you are free to do what you wish, but not whatever you wish, because that assumes that you have multiple choices. You get to choose what you wish because what you wish is always sin. You're dead in sin. Therefore, you can never choose not to do sin. That's the difference. So you got free will in the sense that you are free to choose your death. That's all you got. You don't have freedom to choose not to be dead. Dead people don't get to choose things. So God has to make you alive, then you can make choices. So that's the problem with that whole idea. I don't deny that when we're saved, it seems like we chose God. And we did. But we didn't choose him first. In a microsecond before you chose God, God changed your heart so that you could choose God. So God saved you, and then you chose God and got saved. You see what I mean? It's just a slight difference in timing is all it is. Because only after we are saved are we free to make free choices. You were only free before to choose dead things, not live things. So that's the sovereignty of God, and Job is afraid of it. And the reason he's afraid of it is obvious, because it just squashed him. It's a scary thing to understand that God could squash you. It happens sometimes in lesser degrees. I'm guessing that a lot of you haven't been squashed like Job. Probably no one's ever been squashed like Job except for Jesus. So we will never be that far. But it's still hard when something bad happens to you to recognize that God decided that that was good for you. Because it may take years before you realize why it was good for you. And that's why we say God's in charge. So that's the chapter on Job feeling vindicated. Job is saying that God is just and he will be just with me. Now we go on to chapter 24. And chapter 24 is where Job talks about evil in the world and justice in the world. So let's look at verses 1 through 11. Since times are not hidden from the Almighty, why do those who know him see not his days? Some remove landmarks. They seize flocks violently and feed on them. They drive away the donkey of the fatherless. They take the widow's ox as a pledge. They push the needy off the road. All the poor in the land are forced to hide. Indeed, like wild donkeys in the desert, they go out to their work, searching for food. The wilderness yields food for them and for their children. They gather their fodder in the field and glean in the vineyards of the wicked. They spend the night naked without clothing and have no covering for the cold. They are wet with the showers of the mountains. They huddle around the rock for lack of shelter. Some snatch the fatherless from the breast and take a pledge from the poor. They cause the poor to go naked without clothing. They take away the sheaves from the hungry. They press out oil within their walls and tread wine presses, yet they thirst. So in these first 11 verses, Job is here responding to the false accusations of the friends. You remember the friends were accusing him of all these things. Job is so wicked, he's stealing from the poor, stealing from the orphans, stealing from the widows. So Job is not, though, agreeing that they're right about him. But they are correct that these are social evils occurring in the world. In other words, Job says, yeah, you guys are right, this is happening, but it's not me who's doing it. But this is part of the debate, because now Job is turning the debate away from his supposed sins to the fact that God allows these injustices on the earth. This is what we call the problem of evil, theodicy. Why does God allow evil in the world? Job says, sure, you're right. Widows are being harmed. The poor hide. They lack food. They lack decent clothing. They lack shelter. So in verse 1, though, Job is basically saying this. If you friends are right, and God sees all this evil in the world, then why isn't God avenging all of these evils? Why does God allow them? You claim that God destroys the wicked and saves the righteous. If that's true, then why is the earth full of wickedness? If you guys are right, if your whole idea of the covenant of works is right, God should be smashing all these evil people. Why are they still here? So Job is turning the debate around on his friends here. He says that many wealthy landlords are taking advantage of their works, and they are starving and thirsty. These are the kinds of injustices that Christians should seek to remedy. I've been telling you about injustices that we should not seek to remedy because they don't really exist. Those were false accusations. But there are true injustices in the world that we need to fix. I don't agree in any way with anarchists or socialists, but it is true that some capitalists and some companies in the United States have turned from generosity to greed. There's no doubt about that. People with decades of work and labor in a company suddenly find that they're training their own replacements from a foreign country. That is an injustice. There's no such thing as loyalty anymore, either in workers or in their companies. Say 20 or 30 years ago, employees were local to their employers and they might work their whole life in one place with one company. And the favor was returned. The workers were loyal, the company was loyal. Now, it's every man for himself and every company for itself. If you will cut any corners, you'll provide flawed products, you'll cheat your distributors, you'll lie to any clients. This is the demise of Christian morality that has led to corporate greed and injustice, and it does exist. On the other hand, it is also true that in many cases the workers themselves have brought this upon themselves. When unions became powerful, they made demands that a company could not possibly accept. And so they were forced in some ways to find foreign labor that would not strike and sue them every month. So in some ways, the unions caused this. They picked heavily populated Asian countries where the workers are basically slaves, and that's how they save money. So it's the demise of Christian morality that has also led to human individual thievery and laziness. Many American workers are too selfish and too drugged out of their skulls to be worth hiring. I mean, why would any business hire a lippy, selfish, tardy, stoned worker and pay them anything when all they're going to do is read their cell phones the whole time? So the fault is on both sides. The companies are wicked and the people are wicked. So injustice works both ways when demons control a country. The government is evil, the companies are evil, the people are evil. So why don't we expect that the nation is collapsing around us when everybody's evil? So let's go on to verses 12 through 17. Job talks more about this injustice. Here's the results of it. The dying groan in the city, and the souls of the wounded cry out. But God does not charge them with wrong. There are those who rebel against the light. They do not know its ways, nor abide in its paths. The murderer rises with the light. He kills the poor and needy, and in the night he is like a thief. The eye of the adulterer waits for twilight, saying, "No one will see me," and he disguises his face. In the dark they break into houses, which they marked in the daytime. They do not know the light. For the morning is the same to them as the shadow of death. If someone recognized them, they are in the terrors of the shadow of death. From these verses, it sounds to me like Job's been to Seattle, or Detroit, or San Francisco. Now, liberals view these cities as models of wokeness and fairness. Conservatives shake their head and ask, where is the authority? Job speaks of the dying, the wounded, the rebels, the murderers, the thieves, and the adulterers. And he says they hide their faces with masks because they're cowards and don't want to be seen. What does that sound like? City and state governments that are ruled by corrupt, deluded anarchists allow crime and destruction to go on unchecked because they think it will get them reelected, or maybe they can be a vice presidential nominee for the Liberal Party. And we ask, where is this authority? Why do we have no authority? Why isn't the governor doing anything? Why aren't the mayors doing anything? Well, this is a childish question, and it's obvious to everybody. But there's a much more dangerous question and a much more important question. And that question is, where is God? If God has given up on our nation, we are seeing the end of Western civilization. God sent us a warning 20 years ago. When a dozen antichrists flew airliners into major American buildings, our country briefly woke up. And I think it lasted about 3 weeks. People went back to church for about 3 weeks. We recognized that there were enemies on the outside rather than the inside. People felt patriotic. But then after 3 weeks, everybody went back to their old way of life. We didn't need God to fix our problems after all. All we needed was money to build more bombers and more missiles and make more spies. The government will save us, so we don't really need God. Now here we are in 2020, and we're facing crisis, one crisis after another. Some of them are real and some of them are imagined. There was a partisan impeachment using anonymous sources and disreputable moles to try to bring down our elected government. A virus that has a tiny death rate forces entire countries to shut down their economies and hide in their homes and eliminate the Constitution using power-hungry governors and unelected health officials and their opinions. Then unleashing anarchy on major cities and having leaders refuse to enforce laws and release every criminal to show solidarity with their enemies. So what we have here is not like the movie Cool Hand Luke. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Cool Hand Luke. The warden of the prison, he was in his nice little white suit and he had his nice little white hat. And he said, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And that's what the media says this is all about. It's not. This is not about a failure to communicate. What we have here is the absence of God. When the church was salt and light in the United States, we had a major influence on the nation. Christian morality was taught in schools and government agencies because Christian churches worshiped God rightly and taught their children to do the same. The church was a proper influence as the kingdom of Jesus Christ on earth. But then the church killed itself. We started watering down the Word of God. Churches started saying that Scripture is just a bunch of neat opinions we might want to think about once a week, rather than the law of God to be obeyed. Churches started accepting no-fault divorce, and thus they cracked the family in half. Parents were too busy working to make money to teach their kids anything, so we foisted our kids off onto a godless school system that hates God and morality. Churches started hiring women pastors, homosexual pastors, and now transgender pastors, just as if perversions are perfectly acceptable to God. We decided that the earth means nothing because it'll be burned to a crisp, so we left the environmental movement entirely to the New Age religions. We withdrew from all political activity, hoping if we stayed out of the way, they will just ignore us. But that's silly. They will never ignore real Christians, because real Christians hate evil and love good, which means we will hate their evils, and they don't have any goods for us to love. So our church will always be hated. Compromise did nothing except kill the church. So what we have now is a tiny remnant. And you have to wonder if God has set a numerical limit on how many good people or how many good churches I will count before I destroy the country. It's kind of like Abram at Sodom and Gomorrah when he was talking to Jesus there. Would you spare the city if there were 30 righteous? Oh, good. How about 20? 10? Would you spare them for 10? That's where we are now. And we just don't know which limit God is going to set for our country. How many God-worshiping churches do we need to find so God won't kill us all? The absence of God is a far worse judgment than this virus. Now, the remaining churches, we need to pray and fast to beg God not to destroy our country. Anarchy is a really bad way to go. I mean, there are a number of ways that countries fall, but anarchy is not a good one. If the systems of production and medicine and law and agriculture come to a grinding halt because we have a lack of order, millions will starve and die. And then a dictatorship will rise promising to restore order, and our country will be gone. This is what happens when God abandons a people. So Job goes on then in the last verses, in verses 18 through 25. They should be swift on the face of the waters. Their portion should be cursed in the earth, so that no one would turn into the ways of their vineyards. As drought and heat consume the snow waters, so the grave consumes them who have sinned. The womb should forget him. The worm should feed on him sweetly. He should be remembered no more. Wickedness should be broken like a tree, for he preys on the barren who do not bear, and he does no good for the widow. But God draws the mighty away with his power. He rises up, but no man is sure of his life. He gives them security, and they rely on it, yet his eyes are on their ways. They are exalted for a little while, then they are gone. They are brought low. They are taken out of the way like all the others. They dry up like heads of grain. Now if it is not so, who will prove me a liar and make my speech worth nothing? Okay, now this last paragraph is one of the passages that causes scholars to claim that Job didn't really say this. They will attribute it instead to Zophar or Bildad. And the reason is it sounds like Job is promoting the friends' idea of instant justice. All along, Job's been saying God doesn't judge instantly. And now it seems like he's saying God does judge instantly sometimes. So that's why they say that the manuscripts got mixed up and this part must not be from Job. However, I don't think they're right. I think this is Job. And that he's not saying God judges instantly. He's saying, I wish you were right. I wish God would judge them instantly. I would love to see the wicked broken like a broken tree. I would love to see the worms feeding on them. There's nothing wrong with the idea the friends have. It would be a great system of justice. You sin, God punishes you on the spot. That would be great. It's not how it is, but you could wish it was. And so I think that's what's happening here. This is one good thing about Job's friends. There's not a lot of good things to say about them, but there is one good thing. They want justice. Unfortunately, they want it for the wrong person. They think Job's the one who deserves the justice. No, so they do wish for justice. They just don't realize that their view is wrong and that God ignores the normal boundaries of justice when he causes us to suffer. God is he is no less angry with the wicked just because he lets them live a little longer. In fact, it's actually proof of greater anger. You know, you would be better off, if you weren't a believer, if God killed you now and didn't let you live any longer. Because the longer you live, the more you're going to sin, and the worse it's going to be for you in hell. So it's God's mercy that he lets you live in a manner of speaking, but that's only if you turn. It's God being merciful if you turn. It's not God being merciful if you don't turn. It's God hating you so that you get worse. So Job wishes there was instant justice, but there isn't. You see, Job wants this. The friends want this. But guess what? Job realizes that ignores the sovereignty of God. Let's say I agree with them. My opinion, or your opinion, or Job's opinion, or Job's friend's opinion is right. If we were to decide the timing of justice, then we would be the rulers of the universe and not God. My guess is that even when I have strong opinions about what I wish God would do, so take some of my opinions, it's quite possible that when I share my opinions with you, God pats me on the head and laughs. And he says, it's really cute that you're trying to think of things that you're too incompetent to understand, but it's kind of nice, kind of cute. You're like a pet. We're basically pets in the sight of God. Our opinions don't mean a whole lot. It's a good thing, too. If our opinions meant a lot and God acted on our opinions, we'd really be messed up. Yeah?
I don't call my dogs and cats my family. They're not the family of Christ. So how can I be a pet in the family ever?
You're in the family, yes, but our opinions are not representative of God's opinions. Your ways are not God's ways. So I'm just using it as an example that we are like pets, not that we are pets. Allegorical. I'm being allegorical. It's all right. So anyway, you and I, we might stomp and beat our breasts and say, we hate this anarchy. We wish God would save our nation from doom. But what if God's already decided that our country's doomed? What if this is it? Our opinions and won't make any difference. If God has already decided to destroy us, there's nothing we can do to stop it. We can pray that it'll stop, but God's not going to hear those prayers if that's not his plan. If that's the case, it's because God's plans are better than ours. Now, I can't tell you in any way why it would be better that our country collapse, but for some reason that would glorify God more if that's his plan. I suggest that, like Daniel, we take up intercessory prayer for our country and for our churches. It's the biblical example of confession and praise and hope that we should make. It's what God wants us to do. But remember, though, that when Daniel made his intercessory prayer, they were already in captivity, and they already knew when it was going to end because Jeremiah told them. In our case, we have not yet been destroyed, and we have no promised time of healing. So the best we can do is pray and hope that God will be glorified and that we will not suffer too hard in that time. But the last verse, Job is no longer the punching bag of his friends. In his last verse, you can see his confidence is growing. Now that he knows that he's going to be saved, he can speak of things other than his crises. He says to them, if I'm wrong, which of you can prove me wrong? He's almost daring them. Bring it on, guys. I'm ready for you now. So before, Job was begging them to stop and let him alone, but now he's daring them to try to make him prove wrong. You guys are going to have to do better than all these weak arguments you've been making, is what Job says. So the main application of this speech of Job is pretty clear. It's the importance of justice. One of the most significant attributes of God is justice. Because God created humans in his own image, there is a conscience we have that senses justice. And our minds are wired to desire justice. Everybody pretty much in the world wants justice except the wicked. The wicked don't want justice because they know it's going to come on them. Everybody else wants justice except the wicked. That tells you something about those who want to destroy the justice system and have no police and no courts. They're wicked. The reason they don't want them is because they're wicked and they'll be harmed by it. There are many biblical and historical quotes in the Bible and in history about justice. Proverbs 29:7 says that the righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concerns. Now this verse should concern us. If the liberal party in our country is correct, that conservatives are oppressing the poor, then we should be worried, if that's true. Nancy Pelosi, she claims that her party is the only true religious party because they're the only ones who care about the poor. Now, the only problem with that statement is that it's at least half lie. Her party cares about the poor. That's probably true in a way. However, the idea they have about caring is that they keep power and wealth and position by pretending they care. And also, there is no justice in their form of caring. They care out of selfish motives. They care because it gets them elected and makes them money. So they care for their own selfish reasons. On the other hand, they may be correct, at least in part, that conservatives don't care about the poor. I suspect that the truth is that no party cares about the poor. One party manipulates the poor for political power, the other side ignores the poor. Which of those is more evil? I suspect that manipulating the poor for your own selfish ends is worse because it means you're practicing deceit in it. At least the conservatives are just ignorant and don't care. It's worse to pretend to care, in my opinion. So at any rate, I would say that neither party is helping the poor, and neither party intends to help the poor. Justice is a key component of government. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. Why did God create government? To control evil by punishing it, to keep societies orderly. That is the purpose of government and hierarchies. Justice is the one element that is required for order and culture and controlling evil. You have to have justice. Now, I don't mean that government can control the existence of evil. It can control the prevalence of evil in public. It can punish when evil shows itself up. It can punish it. Liberals complain that governments can't regulate morality, and they always cite the alcohol amendment. You remember Prohibition. We tried to regulate morality, we tried to cancel alcohol, and what happened? It got worse, so we got rid of it. That proves you can't regulate morality. Well, it might be true, but governments can uphold principles of morality and punish extreme violations of it. The reason, I believe, that the United States prospered and looked for 2 centuries to be a nation blessed by God was not because a majority of its citizens were Christians, but because it upheld justice for the most part. There was one major exception. Slavery was the one civic deal in which justice was ignored. And we were punished severely for that mistake in the Civil War. Here's a couple of historical quotes about justice. Daniel Webster, he was a 19th century senator and a lawyer, and he said this: "Justice is the greatest interest of man on earth. Justice is the ligament that holds civilized beings and civilized nations together. Wherever her temple stands, as long as it is honored, there is a foundation for security, happiness, and the improvement of our race." So he was probably a deist. Maybe he was a Christian, it's doubtful. But like many of the founding fathers, he believed at least in justice. And justice was founded on Christian or biblical principles. And that is why God blessed our country. 50 years later, we had President Theodore Roosevelt. And he commented on justice, and here's what he said: "Justice consists not in being neutral between right and wrong, but in finding out what is right and upholding it, wherever it's found against the wrong." In other words, justice is putting rightness ahead of wrongness. That's Theodore Roosevelt's view. In other words, there is right. The whole problem, one of the main problems with our culture today is the philosophy that there is no right and there is no wrong. Everything's relative. If that's true, there can be no justice. If there isn't right and wrong, there can't be justice. And that's where we are now. That's why they're promoting anarchy. As Christians, we have to be loyal to Jesus Christ the King as the ruler of the world. Then we are loyal to our government and its leaders when it makes legal demands of its citizens. But neither party is the government per se, though our current setup is becoming that way. We're getting to the point where our government, where our party decides what all of its representatives will do and vote. That's a dangerous time. That makes this a difficult time for us to choose candidates. Because even if we pick one who's better than another, once they get to our government, one group decides what they will all say. And so the guy you hired may not do what he said he would do because he's part of the party. So what we need to do is choose to vote for whoever is most in favor of justice. So we're no longer able to pick between Christians. We can't pick between the Democrat Christian and the Republican Christian, not only because neither of them are probably Christians. And then you're forced to just decide which one will promote more justice. So that's where we've gone as a country, and that's because God is becoming absent here. He's starting to leave us alone and leave us to our own devices and let us see how that goes. That's why this is such a dangerous time. So I guess the main point is, since we have no Christianity to fall on in our country, in our government, all we have left is justice. At least if we have some justice, we will not be totally overrun by evil. Okay, so are there any questions or comments about Job's replies about justice? Yes?
It's not really about, this is about the video that we watched last Wednesday. You know,
The video you watched on Wednesday, that was a MacArthur sermon, is that right? On the riots.
He's saying there's nothing we can do to change what is going on. All we can do is just love our family. Go to church, love your family. And we basically have to leave the rest up to God, because if you believe in a sovereign God, He's the one that's in control. We don't always understand. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to us. But I mean, watching that last Wednesday really convicted me about loving the family more, than just focusing on what's going on around you in the world.
Yes, loving your family is important, and it's an important part of recognizing there's a difference between hopelessness. I'm not declaring hopelessness. And in fact, the next sermon will talk more about that. What I'm declaring is that there may be no solution. There's a difference between us not having a solution and hopelessness. God can fix things no matter how bad they get, and I have no idea what He might do to fix these things. On the other hand, He may not fix these things. So we have to just trust in God. That's one reason that it's difficult to watch the media. I don't really watch much of it anymore because they want to promote a sense of hopelessness. And that's the devil's area, hopelessness. There's nothing in the Bible about being hopeless. The only hopeless is the devil's side. So no matter how bad things get, God can still fix them. Or even if He doesn't fix them, God will bring us through them. So don't despair. I just suspect that our country is reaching the edge of God's patience. Yes?
In our history, we've run across times like this before where our nation was almost destroyed, but God sent revival and He saved us.
Yep.
We can hope. We have hope in Him.
Yes.
And He can send His Spirit and revive us as a nation.
Yep.
We can only hope that He does, but if the church is preaching the same message that the world is preaching, then where do people turn for hope or help?
Right.
Now they have that, they do it to themselves and then they destroy their lives. That's happening all around us right now. Everything on TV is fear-mongering. Even the Christians on TV are fear-mongering. They're just preaching fear, fear, fear all the time. Either fear against the government, fear of justice, fear of judgment. I mean, it's just constant. And that's what we've been for over a year now. Well, in fact, for a couple of years, it's just been nothing but fear-mongering.
It's true. Everything we've seen for the last year on television is about fear. But the reason they're promoting fear is for their own selfish ends. There is no reason for Christians to be afraid. You can fear in the sense that you don't want to see the country fall apart. But no matter what happens, even if the country falls apart and we all die, we're no reason to be afraid of that because we go to heaven. So our fear is not an ultimate fear. We're just fearing for the safety of our nation. So we do want revival, and we preach that God can revive us, and we hope that he does.
Are we becoming like, say, Nazi Germany, when they were sending the Jews off to the death camps, and all the Christians stood their lips up and said nothing?
Yeah.
And if they did speak up, then they were sent off to the death camps also, so they just sat there. And I've heard people who sat in church and listened to those trains go by, and said that they would start singing real loud, so that they couldn't hear the cries of people going to the death camps. These were Christians,
Yeah.
supposedly. You know? So the church in America that I see is acting the same way. We're walking around like we're blind to what's going on around us, and we can't do anything because they might call us a name. Oh, somebody might not like us. Oh, gee.
Yes,
Where's the fear of God?
the church is not.
Fear of man, but not God.
The church is not acting correctly. You're right. We're not doing anything. And that's, as much as I hate some of these signs, there's that sign in Ferndale that says, silence is racism. It's not really true. But it is true for Christians that silence is wrong if we're not speaking up for the poor. That's why I said we need to be seeking certain kinds of justice. Just because the injustices they're proclaiming on TV aren't true, they're lies, does not mean that there aren't injustices that do need fixing. And we're not doing anything to fix them. And that's largely due to the church has collapsed. The church doesn't believe in the Bible, so why should it do any justice? So really the remnant is failing to do anything, and we need to stand up. The problem is we've been convinced that the church needs to stay out of politics. It's true in a way, but it's not true by and large. It's only true in a small way. It wouldn't be right for me to just talk about one side being better than the other. Both sides have problems. But it's wrong that we just ignore all questions about our nation. And that's why the liberals control the media, is because there's no conservative voice, or very little. And the church should be the voice of justice, not the voice of the Republican Party. It should be the voice of Jesus. And if Jesus says something is unjust, it's unjust. And you better do something about it. So this is something we need to think about as we go through the book of Luke, is how should the church be salt and light and proclaim the truth? And it's not going to make us popular. As soon as we get involved in politics, they're going to try shutting us down because they don't want it. They don't want to hear the truth. And that's what you see in the media now. Only one side is allowed to speak. The other side must be silenced. They're all racists if you say anything against their views. You're a racist or a bigot or whatever. We're going to be called nasty things. If we were like Jesus, we would be persecuted a lot more than we are now. The reason we're not being persecuted is we aren't like Jesus. So that's where we have to go. Anything else? Okay, well, Mike Shoemaker, would you close us in prayer?